What's the most fitting case of vigilante justice you've ever heard of? All these stories about Shrekly assaulters getting their teeth kicked in or murdered. What about that badass that drove around his town spray painting dongs on all the potholes? That way the city was forced to repair them. Not like they were just going to clean the paint and leave the pothole. About 6 years ago in Portland, there was this homeless dude going around jerking off in front of all the lady homeless. So this group of other homeless dudes got sick of his shoot. So they waited for him to go into a porta potty one day, then tipped it over on its door with him in it. Funniest thing I've ever heard. A man's son was abducted by his karate teacher and Shrekly assaulted over quite a long period of time. The police caught him, and as they were bringing him through the airport, his father pretended to be on a payphone. When the Shrekly assaulter and police walked by, he turned around and shot the Shrekly assaulter in the head, killing him instantly. This was all caught live on the news. The father wasn't charged with murder. He received 5 years probation. A 15-year-old boy imitated a 14-year-old girl to attract the attention of a pedophile. When the pedo went to his house, the kid beat him up and called the police on the guy. All done while wearing a Spider-Man mask. A guy caught a man Shrekly assaulting his daughter. By the time the cops got to the scene, the man was bruised and broken and his face was unrecognizable. He told the police that he might have fallen down the stairs a couple times. They accepted that and arrested the Shrekly assaulter. Okay, not so dark and brutal as most comments here. Czech Republic had its own vigilante hero named Super Vaclav for a time. He sat in a park, and when dog owner did not pick up shoot after his dog, Super Vaclav did it for him, and spread it on owner's back. Or, putting out smoker's cigarette on bus stop with bucket or water, etc. It kind of broke my heart when I read it was probably all just some viral marketing stuff. It's more of just justice, but there's the judge that comes up with punishments that fit the crime. A lady left a box of puppies outside, so he ordered her to sleep outside in a box. When I was a baby, our family was in a bad car accident. My dad got out to check the other driver and he apparently stank of whiskey. Dad dragged him out the car and beat his head off the road. He admitted it to the police when they turned up, and the police apparently said to him, so that guy must have hit his head on the steering wheel pretty hard then. Dad didn't get in any trouble and the other driver was either too drunk to know what happened or was in so much trouble anyway he never pressed it any further. My first job was at a tire shop, and I worked with this older guy named Doug. He was around 60, the nicest guy I've ever met. One day at work, a guy and his girl got into a heated argument in our parking lot, and the guy slammed her up against his car. Doug and I saw it, and Doug just looks at me, with the tire iron in his hand, and goes, "1 sec." He walks over to the guy, drops his tire iron, and slams the guy on the ground. He whispered something to him that I couldn't hear from where I was, but the guy got up and opened the passenger door for her and they drove away. Doug walked back over and just started working on a car like nothing ever happened. I'll never forget it. A pretty infamous pedophile was released from prison in Ireland a few years back, and 4 weeks after his release, wherever he went there were stories of people beating the shit out of him till he eventually had to leave the country. No one else was ever charged for the beatings. I remember a newspaper article going around the internet about a junkie robbing a store. While fleeing, he was stopped by a few Marines on leave, and he stabbed one of them. He then ended up tripping and breaking both his arms, 7 ribs, his jaw and his nose, losing most of his teeth, and crushing his windpipe. Somewhere in northern Ontario, a few guys bagged a dude, sack on head, and beat him so bad he spent a long time in the hospital. Dude was physically abusing his wife and daughter. Cops came to the high school and questioned people. Everyone knew who did it. Boyfriend of the daughter. But cops dropped all investigations soon after. My dad always tells me this story from when he was in college in NH. He was friendly with the cops in a small town. The story was that a well-known pedophile that attempted to kill himself by OD. The ambulance picked him up, but just drove around until he died. No one missed him. completely accidentally. I woke up to the sound of a table being knocked over in the living room. I figured that it was my cat and went out in my boxers to yell at him. There was a dude standing wide-eyed in my living room. My roommate used to have tons of parties. If dude had sat down, I would have thought that he was a guest who slept on the couch. But he bolted out the door. I chased. His mistake was running into the back parking lot, because there's nowhere to go from there. I caught him and a fist fight ensued. He was almost passive, only trying to block until I grabbed the wad of cash from his hand. Then, he started punching back. Soon, the sun came out. He ran off. I was so out of it, I pounded on my roommate's window to let me back in. I didn't realize that I was holding his wallet and keys that I took from the guy. I tripped on a purse that was dropped in my doorway. It was from his first victim. Roomie calls the cops. They just made jokes. Burglary investigator comes around that afternoon. I go down to look at mugshots. Turns out that they already had a suspect. Guy had just done 6 months for burglary in an adjoining neighborhood. He went back to jail. I lost a tooth and had a broken nose. In South Africa, vigilante justice is common practice. There was a Shrekly Assault in one of the communities where a group of men held a man, legs open, and set a dog on his genitals. This is usually followed by a large group beating the person to death. The world used to be a different place. Many years ago, when responding to a domestic disturbance, we didn't call it that. If it was obvious the wife had been beaten, the senior officer would remove his hat and pass it around. Cash was put in the hat by everyone present. Then the most junior officer would take the wife and any children out for dinner. Husband was then tied to a chair and tuned up. At the end of the tune-up, it was explained that in 1 week officers would be returning to inspect the paperwork for a life insurance policy with the wife as beneficiary. If the paperwork did not exist, another tune-up was in order. If the paperwork did exist, an explanation that if they had to respond there again the wife would be collecting the insurance. Cowboy boots are expensive. Someone ran into a cowboy store and stole a couple pairs and ran towards the exit. My dad tripped the guy, then sat on him and held his legs against his back while laying on top of him in a cowboy hat and boots. Basically hog-tied the guy till the cops came. A guy tried to stab me in the eye with a lockback, wouldn't hand over my wallet. His dealer got wind of it, spiked him with acid and dumped him in the woods at night to find his own way home. From what I'm told, it was a 15-mile walk to the nearest town. I don't even buy from the dude. A prison guard accidentally left a convicted pedo in a holding cell with many other inmates. The pedo got a massive beating once the other inmates found out what he was in for. In 10th grade, friend I knew since 3rd grade started dating a girl I knew since 8th grade. She started becoming more isolated and he never brought her out cause she was shy or didn't like hanging around guys. Turns out he was beating her on the regular. Bad and in several different ways. We had no idea. Lots of really bad stuff. She finally confided in me and I didn't know what to do. So I found a time to run until her uncle boyfriend had forbidden contact from any of us to anyone she knew by this point. I'll quietly let him know and told him he had to do something quick. Well, he was a police officer. Well, he took him out into the middle of nowhere desert with some friends, other cops, and beat the ever-living shoot out of him. Middle of the night. Complete darkness out there. Left him in his underwear and let him walk home. It wasn't unusual for him to go missing for a day or two, but at some point his mum called the police. The cop uncle shows up. Let her know she needed to take care of things with him or worse things happen to bad dumb fricks. They left. No report. Eventually he gets home. Go to doc. Drops out of school. He knows we all now know what a piece of shoot he was. Uncle Cop told her never to worry again. I knew a girl that was Shrekly assaulted. She was 14 at the time and was staying at her same age female friend's house for a sleepover. While she was asleep he sodded her face down and held a knife to her throat whilst saying, "If you scream I will kill you." She described graphically how painful it was And that's how she was left bleeding from the Shrekly Assault. She told her brother's cousins a few months later. She watched us cut the skin from his thigh and stapled it to his face. Pretty fricked up. The guy was not killed, however. He moved away soon after and she had not seen him since. She went into a terrible depression for at least 2 years, dropped out of school, started smoking a lot of weed, and slept with a lot of people. She attempted suicide a few times and regularly self-harmed. She did get better though, if there's such a thing. She's managed to turn her life around and is finishing her degree. She's done very well and wants to help others. I'm very proud of her. This is a story a colleague of mine once told me. I believed it to be true, though I have no doubt that she may have exaggerated some elements. Take it with a pinch of salt. She was a sergeant in the Army Medical Corps, stationed in Germany. A couple of girls, new to the army, worked with her. They went drinking together one evening and a few infantry soldiers happened to be in the same bar. One of the infantry soldiers decided to be a little too forward with one of the other girls and fondled her inappropriately. Once he'd been pushed away, he hit the girl and tried to drag her outside. My friend, Sergeant, spotted this immediately and calmed the situation down. She invited the man back to the bar and bought him a drink. Then another drink. Then another drink. Until he was pass out drunk. Once he'd reached this stage, she and her colleagues took him back to the barracks. Remember me telling you that she was in the Army Medical Corps? Well, they decided to put itching powder on his leg and then put a cast on him. When he woke up, they told him that he'd been in a terrible accident and that he'd broken his leg. They said that he was lucky they were there to help. He'd been so drunk that he couldn't remember whether it was true or not. They let him go a week before taking the cast off. My friend got a severe dressing down for the whole incident, but decided it was worth it.